In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
This is an episode about purpose. Purpose is something we talk a lot about on Money Tales, because in our experience, when people align their relationship with money to their purpose, they make more satisfying and confident money decisions. Dr. Jordan Grumet joins us again on Money Tales. Since we last spoke with him, Jordan has been spending a lot of time talking and speaking about purpose. When he shared his message about purpose with audiences, he encountered something surprising. People weren't leaving inspired, they felt anxious. This purpose anxiety, as Jordan calls it, comes from society's obsession with what he dubs Big P purpose. The idea that happiness lies in discovering some grand, singular mission in life. Jordan invites us to embrace little p purpose instead. It's about finding joy in the everyday, the simple things we love doing, the processes that light us up. By focusing on these small, tactile joys, we can take the weight off the search for big P purpose and make it something approachable, fulfilling, and even fun. Let me tell you more about Jordan. With a profound understanding of both medicine and finance, he used blogging to share his thoughts, specifically focusing on financial independence and wellness. This passion culminated in 2018 when he launched the Earn and Invest podcast, which went on to become an award-winning personal finance podcast. In 2022, Jordan's first book was published, titled Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. He talked about it with us on Money Tales in August 2023. Today, he talks with us about his recently published book, The Purpose Code.
Here are 3 key money topics Jordan hits on in this conversation. First, how purpose is not a hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. Instead, it's a beautiful creation that you craft. Start with the activities that light you up. Be curious, be brave, and don't be afraid to step into completely new experiences that might surprise you. Second, how your life's purpose isn't a rigid, unchanging path. Think of it more like a river, constantly flowing, shifting, and reshaping itself. Some purposes are like quick, exhilarating rapids that carry you through a few hours or days, while others are deep, meandering currents that guide you through entire seasons of your life. And third, purpose isn't something you can buy. In fact, you don't need money to create purpose. However, you can use money as a tool to help you pursue a more purposeful life. We hope you share this episode with a friend. Now on to our conversation with Dr. Jordan Grumet.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager. Cami, I wanted to tell you and listeners about a client meeting that I had last week. Got to meet with a client that I've worked with for over 20 years. And he's in a position in his life where he was able to liquidate a very material real estate holding. He owned it with some other folks. And that has unlocked the keys to his financial plan in terms of all the things he's wanted to do in terms of giving to other people and to organizations that he cares about. The meeting that we had last week was one of a series of meetings where we're helping him understand and identify what the purpose of this wealth is in terms of the benefit and impact he wants to have on these other individuals, mostly family members, and charitable organizations that he really cares about.
As you tell this story, I can only imagine the feeling in that conversation that you're fulfilling dreams. This is so cool.
We are. And it's not easy work. It's not as if you just write a bunch of checks and you're done. The client's being very thoughtful. What is the purpose of these gifts? Why is he making them? What impact does he want to have on the individuals, on these charitable organizations that he is giving to? For his family members, there are many of them, and he wants to be fair, not necessarily equal. He wants to be fair. He's being thoughtful about how much he's giving to each of them, and he's being thoughtful about how he's giving, whether he's writing checks outright with some context giving, or whether he's putting money into 529 plans for the benefit of future educations of family members, or whether he's putting money in trust to be used later on in the individual's lives. On the charitable side, he could easily just write a check and walk away, but he really cares about these organizations. He's being thoughtful about what the gifts he's making are meant to fund and about how long he's going to take to give these gifts, because he doesn't want to overwhelm the organizations with a flood of money. He wants to give them time to be thoughtful, and he wants to collaborate with them about what they'll do with this money and his ideas around that. It's a lot of work. It's fun work, and it's important work. As we continue to remind this client, it's not work that needs to be done all in one day.
So important. It can feel overwhelming.
It very much could. So we're breaking it down into small pieces and helping him move forward that way. And there's a lot of purpose tied into it, which I thought would be nice for the conversation we're about to have today.
Let's do that. It's my pleasure to welcome back to Money Tales, Jordan Grumet, who's also known as Doc G.
Thank you so much for having me back on. I'm just excited for the conversation.
We've had the pleasure to get to know you in a previous conversation on Money Tales. Please remind our listeners a brief overview of your background and what you've been working on since we last talked with you.
It's been about a year and a half, and everything flows from our last conversation. So the quick recap is, when I was 7 years old, my father died. He was a physician. I thought I could make up for this cosmic issue that I dealt with during childhood by becoming a doctor like him. That was going to solve everything. I eventually became a doctor, and I found that that didn't really serve me. I burnt out really quickly, and I realized that this version of purpose I co-opted, this identity I co-opted from my father, didn't really light me up on the inside. And at the same time, I discovered financial independence and realized I had enough money that I could stop doing this thing that had pretty much been my purpose and identity my whole life. I eventually did, but it took years. And in the meantime, I dove into things that I really enjoyed, things like personal finance, blogging, podcasting. Eventually, I did a podcast about personal finance called Earn and Invest, and I would interview these business leaders, financial independence people, these really impressive people about how to make money. And they could tell me about how they made money and how they invested money. But what they often couldn't tell me is what enough looked like in their life and what this money was all for. And strangely enough, I started getting the answers to these questions from my medical world. I still did a little bit of medicine. I took care of hospice patients, patients who were terminally ill. And I found that my dying patients would talk about regrets, and they would talk about things that were deeply important to them. And none of it had to do with how much money they made during their life. And none of it had to do with how many nights or weekends they worked. And so I wrote a book about what hospice can teach us about money and life. I called it Taking Stock. You guys interviewed me about that book. And a main premise to that book was that we should put our sense of purpose, identity, and connections before our financial framework, and then build a financial framework around it. When I went to market this book and give talks and go to conferences, I got people coming up to me afterwards angry. And it really confused me. The first time this happened, I thought, okay, this is a one-off, but it kept on happening over and over again. People would come up to me and say, you've been telling me that I need to find my purpose, and I don't know what my purpose is, and it's causing me anxiety, and I don't think there is any sense of purpose, and I've been looking for it forever. Please stop telling me to find my purpose. And so after I got enough of these responses, I did a deep dive in the literature, and I found two things which seem to contradict each other. One is having a sense of purpose in life is associated with health, happiness, and longevity, and it's very clear. But the other thing I found is that up to 91% of people at some point in their life have something called purpose anxiety. It means this idea of purpose actually causes them to be anxious, frustrated, and depressed. And so the question is, how can purpose be both the most important thing in our lives, but also a source of huge anxiety? And this is a paradox. And so I decided to write The Purpose Code, this book about it. to help people realize that we fundamentally get purpose wrong and there's a better way to look at it.
We're really excited that you wrote the book, Jordan. We're super excited to dive into it because, as you can tell, purpose comes up a lot of times. And you're right, you can't just ask someone, well, what is your purpose in life? That's really daunting. I'm curious, how do you ease into those conversations? And what are the misperceptions that come up in terms of people in their views of that word purpose? Because it is a heavy word.
I don't think it should be a heavy word. We've made it into a heavy word, and that's why there's so much purpose anxiety. Most people feel that they have one purpose in life, and they either find it and live happily ever after, or they don't find it and are miserable. And on top of that, society tells us that we should dream big. If you can dream it, you can build it. It's part of the American way. And so most people believe that they have this big, audacious version of purpose. I call it big P purpose. They have this big thing they're supposed to do, and that's going to be the key to happiness. And so it's becoming a billionaire or having an 8-figure business or becoming president or traveling to the moon. Whatever your big version of purpose tends to be, we tend to grab on and glom onto those things. And instead of making us happy, a lot of times it makes us upset because most of the time we just don't have agency to do those things. We can look at social media and see that we should have 6-pack abs and we should travel the world to every country and we should have a 7-figure business. But the truth of the matter is that's someone else's version of purpose. And often they're trying to sell us something. But honestly, for us, we might not have the agency to do that. We might not be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with the right genetics and have the right amount of luck. And so if you make a version of purpose based on that, of course, it's going to be hard to talk about and frustrating because most people don't actually have the ability to get there. And so I think we have to take the stakes down. We have to take purpose and make it not so weighty, but instead it has to be simple and straightforward. What I call little P purpose, it's not big and audacious at all. In fact, it's not set up on goals, which most big audacious purpose is all about reaching goals. Little P purpose is all about doing the things we love doing. It's about process. And if we start thinking about what are the million things that we enjoy doing on a daily basis or could enjoy doing, it makes it a lot easier, a lot more palpable, a lot more tactile. And that's how we take all that weight off of it and really start searching for the simple things that light us up.
I love that description of little P purpose, not this capital P overwhelming one thing. Let's take that a little further. So you're writing down all the things that you're super passionate about. How do you get comfort around finding some cohesiveness? And do you coach people in helping them get to some way of describing this is my small p purpose, lower cap P?
I definitely coach people. And I think one of the big mistakes we make is we think we're supposed to find purpose. And the truth is, I don't think you find purpose. You actually create and build purpose. So that's the first mistake. Purpose is very action oriented and it's about present and future. And so you have to build purpose. You don't just find it. But it is true that we have to decide what to build purpose around. What are those beckonings in our life? What are those inklings of importance? I call them purpose anchors. And so we do have to kind of search for some of these purpose anchors to then build a life of purpose around. So a lot of what I talk to people about is how do you find your purpose anchors? And believe it or not, it's much easier than you think. In the book, I talk about 4 or 5 different ways to do this, but to run down a few very, very quickly. One is to look at regret. The way I do this, because I'm a hospice doctor, is we look at what's called the life review. It's a structured series of questions we do with dying patients so they can review their lives. But a big part of that is what do you regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do now that you know that you're going to die? Well, regret, if you turn that around in a young, healthy person who has much more time and has much more agency, regret is really another name for a purpose anchor. So first and foremost, we can look at our life regrets. And I think that's a great place to decide to build a life of purpose around. Another easy one is the joys of childhood. Before we got serious about life and got on a career track, most kids can go out and play for hours and they forget that time passes and they don't have any major goal except to do something they like. It's just joyful activity. Well, a lot of us had these joys of childhood and we move on. When we get older and we start thinking about career and we go to high school and worry about grades, what did your childhood bedroom look like? What were the posters? What were the trophies? What were the drawings? When I was a little kid, if you went around my room, it was cluttered with baseball cards. I loved baseball cards. Well, the truth is, I got away from that. I eventually told myself that's not what an adult does. Adult goes to school and becomes a doctor. But every time I see something about baseball cards on the internet or on Facebook, my brain lights up. And so I know for me, that's a purpose anchor I could always go back to. I'm too busy right now. I have too many other purposeful activities.
Jordan, you have me back in my teenage bedroom with all my 80s boy band posters up on the wall.
Me too, Sandy.
Think about the joy that all that brought you. See, the problem here, and when we talk about purpose anchors, people convince themselves purpose has to be lifelong and it has to change the world. And the truth of the matter is, you can have one purpose or many. Your purpose can last days, weeks, months, years. It doesn't really matter. The point is, what things do you enjoy the process of doing? And once you stop enjoying the process of doing them, you can let them go and pick up other purpose anchors. So those are two good ways: regrets, the joys of childhood. Another two just to think about. I always use what I call the art of subtraction. If you take your job, and a lot of people don't like their jobs, and you start scribbling out all your responsibilities and all your daily activities, if there's anything there that you love, don't scribble it out. I was exhausted by being a doctor, but the one thing I loved was the 4 hours a week I spent doing hospice medicine. For me, that became a purpose anchor. Even though I walked away from being a doctor mostly, I was able to keep the one thing I still loved in my job. And most people have something they love in their job, even if it only takes up a few minutes every work week. How can we build some purpose around that? And last but not least, a great way to think about purpose too is if you don't know what your purpose anchors are and nothing else has helped, throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Try a bunch of new things. Hang out with people you don't normally hang out with. Say yes to things you'd normally say no to. And then after the day's over, did that bring you joy? Was the process fun? Is that worth building maybe some purpose around it? So those are 4 good ways to start thinking about purpose anchors. But with all of these, we're really lowering the stakes and we're saying, let go of that primal fear that you're going to miss out on something. And the truth of the matter is, I have tons of purpose anchors, and I could even only pursue a few of them at a time. It's almost like a dart on the dartboard. It doesn't matter what you pursue. Find some things you might like, but then it's really the building that's important. And that's where you dig in and start saying, well, this thing is important to me. How can I get involved? I like baseball cards. Can I go to baseball card shows? Could I start a blog about baseball cards? Could I sell some online? Could I start going to the local baseball card shops? Could I join the local communities? Think about all the different things you could do once you realize that this is a purpose anchor for you.
Thank you for bringing all of this to light. I do agree with you that purpose does change. We see that in our own lives and the lives of our clients, where priority shifts in what's taking up that energy capacity changes based on how we're moving through life, the experiences that we have, what's moving us at a particular moment. I'd love us to turn the conversation now to the marriage of purpose and money, because there's a lot to unpack there.
I love the example you just gave, but I also want to shake my head and say, look, everyone thinks that you need money to have purpose, but the truth of the matter is money is just one tool. And so while I love the story you were just telling about how this person now had this windfall and can start using that money in a purposeful way, but I also want to say, why did you wait to have the money to start being purposeful? Those charities you were interested in, those communities you wanted to be a part of, those things you wanted to begin, why did you have to wait for money to start them? Because money is a great tool, but it's one of many tools. And we also have our youth, our energy, our communities, our skills, our passions, and those are also wonderful tools too. And so you don't have to wait till you get to some monetary amount to start pursuing purpose. But I will very also clearly say that having money helps because it's a tool and you can use that tool to free up your time. I don't have to clean my house because I have enough money that I can hire someone to clean my house. And that gives me time to then go and pursue other activities. But there's really almost no correlation between money and purpose. You don't need money to pursue purpose, and yet money can help you pursue a more purposeful life.
You alluded to something just now that you bring up in the book, which is the idea that people have more than just financial capital. They have social capital. You write about that a lot. There is intellectual capital. There is spiritual and legacy capital. There's so many different aspects. I just want to be clear for this one client. It's not as if he was just waiting. He has been involved in these organizations in different ways. So to your point, if your purpose is to enjoy the earth that is available to us, you could easily hike anywhere without any real cost, especially in your local area. There's things you can do. But I do feel that when you have the financial resources, I've seen it in the lives of the clients we serve. They are able to live more satisfying lives when they're aligning their use of that money, whether it's spending it, giving it away, or just holding on to it for a rainy day. And they're aligning that with their purpose. That's when I think the light bulbs go off and they get really excited.
We can look at what winning the game looks like. And I like to really look at this at 1,000 feet. What does winning the game look like as a human being? I believe we're here for the set amount of time and we have very little control over that. You can exercise and eat well and not smoke, and those things are going to help you live a little bit longer. But basically, you've got a set amount of time on this earth, and time passes and you can't do anything about it. You can't buy it, you can't sell it, you can't trade it. No matter what happens, time is passing, the clock is ticking. All we can do is try to fill these time slots of our lives, right? Are we talking about days, weeks, months, or years? But we have all these time slots. And the best thing we can do is fill those time slots with as much things as we love and as little things as we loathe. Now, when I'm talking about what do we love, I'm talking about purpose, purposeful activities that light us up. So your real goal as a human being is to continuously improve that calculus, to be looking at your calendar every week, month, or year, and slowly adding things in you love and taking away things you loathe. There is no question, again, that money's a great tool in allowing you to add in things you love, and being purposeful and aligning your money with your daily activities and what's important to you really improves that calculus. And as we get older and older, hopefully we're getting better and better at this, such that one day you look at your calendar and there's nothing I loathe. And I love most everything. And if I decide there's something on my calendar I don't want to do, I can just not do it. And so that's really the goal for everyone. But I will say the other side is people do sometimes get confused and say, well, I don't have any money, so I can't start working that calculus. And a lot of people, I say, it is true that having money can feel very much like a privilege, but there are all sorts of young people who have tools that I don't have. I'm 51 years old. I'm not 20. So maybe if I was 20 and I was working an 8 to 6 job and I didn't love it and I felt beaten up, I don't have enough money to pursue purpose. I would say to them, that's true. You don't have as much money, but you're also young. You don't have a family yet. You don't have a mortgage. Your Saturdays and Sundays are pretty much your own, whereas mine are not. So maybe you could build in some purposeful activity for a few hours on Sunday. And if that happened to make you some money, let's say it was a side hustle, that might create some margin in your life to work a little less hard. If it doesn't create any money or margin, at least you've now spent 3 extra hours a week doing something purposeful. So when we're looking at that calculus of your schedule, you're adding in purposeful activity, even if you're not getting rid of something you don't love. And so this idea that we can't start until we have money, I think is off base.
Or that you have to amass a certain amount. I think that's important. You also write about the idea that money can't buy love, purpose, or happiness. How do you see people get caught in that trap, thinking that it's going to be able to buy love and happiness and purpose?
There are a few things I think we should discuss on this. So I'm going to take 2 different tacks. The first tack is I want to actually talk about the studies about money and happiness, because there's always these discussions. There have been some good studies that everyone refers to. One of the first is Kahneman and Deaton. I think it was 2012 or 2013. Pretty much did a study on money and happiness. And they found that once you make, at the time, $70,000 or more dollars, that making more money doesn't increase happiness. Notably, this was a retrospective study. They took data that was collected for something else. I think there was only one measure of income for all of the participants. Not the highest quality of studies, but it was the best we had. Then this guy, Matthew Killingsworth, in 2016, did another study. Now, this wasn't retrospective. In fact, what they did is they sent texts to people multiple times a day for many days in a row, and they measured happiness and those kind of things. I think they also still only did a one-time projection of income. And they came to the conclusion that increasing money does actually bring increasing happiness to certain people, but the amount of happiness is not as great as it is up to a certain point, like that first $70,000. Eventually, Killingsworth and Kahneman came together, relooked at the data, and came to similar assumptions. There's a baseline level of happiness. Once you get to a point, that's where you get most of your happiness with money. But for certain groups of people, making more money still led to more happiness. When we look at that data, what I'd really love to compare it to is what I call the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study. It started in the early 1900s. They took, I can't remember, it was a few hundred Harvard students. They studied them over many, many years, up to 80 years. They eventually brought in their family members, and then they eventually brought in controls from the Boston area. So there were eventually thousands of people. They started by interviewing them every 2 years, but as time went on and technology got better, they started doing blood tests, MRIs, EEGs, studying their families, and they studied them for 80, 90 years. And at the end of all this, what did they say that was most connected with happiness? Well, it wasn't money, it wasn't career, it wasn't achievements, it wasn't even purpose, which we can come back to later. What it actually was interpersonal connections. I get the Kahneman-Deaton data, I get the Killingsworth data, but for my understanding of how science is done, I think the Harvard data is much better and much more enduring. And so I don't think it's money that really brings us happiness. I think it's interpersonal connections. Now, I would argue that little p purpose is a great conduit to building communities and connections. And in fact, that's why I think the data also shows that purpose is associated with happiness. So that's first and foremost. Now, the other point I wanted to make on this question of you can't buy purpose or you can't buy happiness, a lot of people think that a certain net worth or a certain amount of success at business or what have you is going to make them happy. And the problem with that is one of two things. One is, let's say I want to become a billionaire, and I'm like, that's going to make me happy. And basically, that's the way I'm going to get there. Part of the problem is most people just can't make it to billionaire status. So you're likely to fail and feel some purpose anxiety based on that. But let's say you get there. The problem is once people get there, because it's not deeper and enduring, it's kind of a goal-based sense of purpose. Once you meet that goal, a lot of people feel happy for a short period of time, but there's this thing called hedonic adaptation where we adapt and fall back to our baseline level of happiness. And so they find that they don't have a further goal. And so a lot of times they double down. I mean, look at people like Elon Musk who make tons and tons of money, more than they could ever spend, and yet they're still trying to make more. That's one problem. The other problem is loss aversion. A lot of times you make it up to that number and you're petrified you're going to lose it. And in fact, you're more petrified you're going to lose it than you were unhappy not to have it in the first place. And so it's really hard to use money as a source of purpose or happiness. It just doesn't work.
I think that's a really astute point, and it's something that we bring into conversations all the time because there are so many people that have grown up with an expectation that they pursue a certain career, that they make a certain amount of money. And those things don't always align with what brings them joy. And I always like to think about it as satisfaction rather than happiness, because happiness is so fleeting. Even the happiest person can't be happy forever. It's not a permanent state, where I think satisfaction has more staying power. And I'm just curious if you have a perspective about that in the context of purpose.
We argue a lot about what happiness means. I don't have all the answers, but here's what it looks like to me. I think happiness is built on two things: meaning and purpose. And so I think you need both meaning and purpose in order to be happy long-term. So what does that mean? Most people think meaning and purpose are the same thing. Here's how I see it. Meaning is a cognitive belief about our past. It's all about thoughts, and it's all about your past, and it's the stories you tell yourself about yourself. Happy people tend to tell themselves heroic stories about their past. They say, I went through this trauma, things were bad, I got through it, and that's why I'm here where I am today. I succeeded, so I'm probably going to succeed and be happy in the future. Unhappy people tell themselves a victim story. All these bad things happened to me. I never was able to get ahead, and that's why I am where I am today. And because I wasn't able to get ahead in the past, I'm probably not going to be able to get ahead in the future. Meaning is all about feeling enough. People who tell themselves a heroic story about the past feel like they were enough and will continue to be enough, whereas people who tell them a victim story don't feel they're enough. Meaning is the first key to happiness. Then comes purpose. Purpose is all about present and future, and purpose is about action. So remember, meaning is about thoughts and about your past, whereas purpose is about your present and future, and it's about action. When you feel enough, when you have a good sense of meaning, it's very easy to walk into your present and future and do things that fill you up and be happy. The problem is a lot of people have a meaning problem. They don't feel enough. They've been told that to be enough, they have to enter a certain profession or make a certain amount of money or whatever was built into them either through generational trauma from their parents or lived trauma where they lived through something that pushed them to have this story, this belief about what would make them enough. So if you don't have a good sense of meaning, A lot of people, instead of going back and doing therapy and thinking about their past, they try to purpose their way to enough. They're like, if I just achieve this, I'll finally feel enough. I'll finally be happy. You can't purpose your way to enough. You can't purpose your way to happiness. A lot of the times, because they haven't dealt with meaning, even when they hit that benchmark that they thought would make them happy, it doesn't last. And so I like to talk about Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. I think they're great versions of people who have a meaning issue and they've tried to purpose their way to enough. And so they accomplish incredible things. But when you look at them, they don't particularly look happy and they're always trying to get more. That's my version of meaning and purpose. Where satisfaction fits into happiness, I think happiness is a long-term thing that peaks and ebbs and flows at time. I think satisfaction is very goal-oriented. I think we often feel satisfied when we reach a goal. But the problem with satisfaction, again, is it tends to be short-lived. Whereas I think if we establish a good sense of meaning and then joyfully move into purpose, we almost enter what I'd call a flow state. You get to do things that light you up so much that you're not worried about achieving a goal, that you're losing track of time and you're spending more and more time doing these kind of things. And I think that's really where happiness lies. And so you need both meaning and purpose to get there.
That's nuanced to me. I'm struggling because I know, and I might be one of those people that find great satisfaction in achieving, whether it's ticking off something on my list, what a relief, or achieving something in my work or my life.
Here's the rule about achievements. I tell people you should be goal agnostic, but not goal phobic. What does that mean? Goals are great and achievements are great, but if you find you're not enjoying the process of doing what you're doing in order to reach that goal or achievement, then you're probably wasting your time. So I love to talk about podcasting. I love podcasting. I'm a podcaster. I would love to get 1 million downloads a month. That could be a great goal for me. But if I start doing things I don't like to do to get there, if I start going out on social media, which I hate, but I'm like, this is what I need to do in order to get those 1 million downloads. If I start getting rid of enjoying the process just for the goal, then I've kind of lost, because then it becomes big P purpose, which really probably is going to bring about more anxiety. And even if I reach my 1 million, I'm going to be petrified I'm either going to lose it and people are going to stop following me, or I'm going to set a higher goal and be like, well, I have to get to 2 million now. So either way, it doesn't fulfill me. But if I look at it as little P purpose, which is I'd love to get 1 million downloads, but it doesn't really matter, because when I get in front of a mic and for that hour I'm interviewing someone, I lose myself and I'm so deeply into this conversation that even if not a single person listens to that episode, it was still well worth my time. Then I win. I win whether I get the 1 million downloads or I don't get the 1 million downloads. And I personally would like more of my time to be like that, where the goal is a little bit superfluous or a happy accident, but it doesn't have to be the reason. Because if the goal becomes your reason or your purpose or your happiness, we find we spend a lot of time doing things we actually don't like to do in order to reach that moment. And we all know achievements and hedonic adaptation, they're short-lived. So we spend 95% of our time in the process of doing things and only in 5% getting there. And so if you're not enjoying the 95% just for that 5%, you're really not enjoying most of your life.
Beautifully said, Jordan. Let's turn this back around to money as we end this conversation. Tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be, and who's it going to be with?
I have regular money conversations all the time on the Earn and Invest podcast. And so the grand majority of my time is to help people figure out the perspective of how powerful a tool money can be, but to help them realize that it's not the tool they should be spending all their time thinking about.
Wow, Jordan. All right. Where's the best place for our listeners to find you, since you are not passionate about social media? Where should they find you?
The easiest place is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can find both of my books, Taking Stock and The Purpose Code, which comes out January 7th, as well as find all the places I create content. So the main one is the Earn and Invest podcast. There are links there. But I also do a Purpose Code Substack, which is just all about purpose. There's some links to the older stuff I've done, including a financial blog, as well as a medical blog, which I did for like 15 years.
And you were kind enough to share the Purpose Code with Sandy and me, and it's tremendous. Can't wait to continue reading it. You got me thinking about life and my purpose. Sandy and I, like you, come in every day with the podcast, and we are just so passionate about it. So keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. Thanks for joining us on Money Tales.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Asperient. Go to asperient.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@asperient.com. See you next time.